Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
All right, good afternoon. So today Balu Sivan will tell us about economics of repeated sales.
Okay. Thanks, Yuval. So this talk is about a really basic economic setting of repeated interaction. So the setting is really simple. You have a single seller who is offering a fresh copy of an item every day to the same buyer. Okay, so think of a fishmonger who's offering fresh fish every day. The buyer who enjoys consuming fish, and the buyer has some value which is private, only he knows it, for consuming the fish, and the value is the same every day. Okay, it doesn't change, but initially this value is assumed to be drawn from a publicly known distribution, meaning that the seller also knows the distribution, right? Once it is drawn, it remains the same every day. Okay? And the seller has a cost which is public, and here we normalize it to 0. Okay, it doesn't change things. Okay, the setting is really simple. So this happens for n days. Each day the seller comes, talks to the buyer. So what is the rule of the game? The seller can post a price on every day. That's all. Okay. The buyer is basically allowed to take it or leave it. If he takes it, pay the price. Right. It happens for n days. Okay. So we call it the fishmonger's problem after Amos Fier suggested this name to us. Okay, so let's look at the most basic fishmonger's problem, one-day interaction, right? So you have a seller and a buyer, right? The buyer's value is private, he knows it, but for the seller it's drawn from this distribution. Now what happens, right? Now you have to post some price. Clearly if the seller posts a price P, the buyer will accept it only if his value is above the price, right? You should do it if and only if. So the seller is maximizing the quantity price times the probability that the value exceeds the price, which for the uniform distribution it's clear that it should be a price of half, and he'll say whether he accepted or rejected. He'll get a revenue of exactly a quarter.
So right? That's if the buyer doesn't use the hammer.
Yeah. Okay. So what happens if you have a two-day interaction, right, between the seller and the buyer? So again, the value, emphasize the value remains the same for the 2 days. Otherwise, there's nothing to do here. The value is getting freshly drawn every day. You know, the seller obviously is interested in collecting as much information as possible about the buyer's value from the first sale. And the buyer, on the other hand, is very inclined to hide his value because the seller will exploit it if he knows about this value, right? So what will transpire in the 2 days, right? Something will happen on the first day, something will happen on the second day. So what's the revenue, right? That's the question you're asking this talk. Okay. So clearly what's the problem, right? What is the buyer afraid of? The buyer is afraid of the fact that the seller will exploit the knowledge of his value, right? Suppose the seller can pacify the buyer by saying that I'm not going to exploit you. The seller can commit that in all the future days this is the price, and he reveals it on the first day. If he has the power to commit, then one thing that the seller could do is the following. On the first day he puts a price of a half, and he commits on the first day itself that regardless of whether you accept or reject, I'm going to put a price of a half on the second day also, right? Then it's clear that the revenue for 2 days is just 2 times the revenue for 1 day. It's a half. The same token, the revenue for n days is just n over 4. Okay, I'm going to call this as the Myerson optimal revenue benchmark. Okay, so the single day optimal. It's a very special case of Myerson's mechanism, which is what is the single day optimal thing. And that's why I call this Myerson optimal revenue benchmark. So if the seller were able to give this commitment that I'm not going to exploit you, the situation is very clear. Okay, you have a nice revenue, linearly growing revenue. But realistically, the seller is often not able to commit to this kind of a price sequence. After all, it's very difficult to resist the temptation of lowering a price if you think that the buyer is not buying, or to raise the price if you think that he's capable of buying, right? In any case, the buyer is not willing to believe that the seller will not succumb to this temptation. Okay. So what will happen in this case? So you have no commitment from the seller about future prices. So what do you think will happen, right? how many people think that the seller extracts the entire value of the buyer, right? So what's that? Eventually, right? So he slowly learns, interacts, and then at some point, as number of rounds goes to infinity, you get almost the entire value. So who thinks that?
And what can the buyer do? He can.
The buyer can only say yes or no every round. That's it. He can cheat, yeah. I mean, of course, he can do anything, right? You post any price, I can say yes or no arbitrarily. No rules that I should do something. If I accepted a higher price, I should reject anything.
What does the buyer's value, what's the role of the buyer's value in this, if the buyer can do anything?
No, I mean, the buyer can do, in principle, he can do anything, but he wants to maximize his utility at the end of the game, which is his value for consuming the fish over n days minus the price he paid, and the utility is additive over there.
Okay. Right. And there's no loss for not buying any fish.
There is no loss, yes, but he gains something if he consumes and pays a price lesser than his value. Right. So do you think that at the end of this interaction, the seller will eventually know everything? Or that it doesn't matter, right, whether he can commit or not, I'll get exactly Myerson optimal revenue. Or that you'll get something even lesser than Myerson optimal revenue.
So, but what is the buyer just trying to maximize, right?
Buyer is trying to maximize his own happiness, which we measure by his utility, which is additive over rounds. And in each round, the utility is the value for consuming the fish minus the price he paid. Right?
When you say seller cannot commit to future price, he cannot sign a contract or something.
There's no contract, correct.
Like he's saying, I can only tell you the price for today, I don't know.
Yes, anything could happen tomorrow.
I think seller should be at a disadvantage, huh?
Any other?
Given that you're asking this, the answer is probably C.
Yeah, okay, so it is C. But the proof is very simple and cute, okay? So suppose there was an equilibrium, right, where equilibrium is a pair of strategies, so the seller and the buyer, where each one is mutually best responding to the other, right? If you give me this equilibrium and tell me that there is an equilibrium where you can extract more than Myerson optimal revenue, right? Then I can use it to get a one-round mechanism where I get more than a quarter. Okay, and here's how it works. You give me this mechanism, and here is the one-round mechanism. Okay, the one round, I'll ask the buyer to report his true value to me, and I'll say that I'll simulate this perfect Bayesian equilibrium. Right? So I'll define what an equilibrium is, but for now I'll simulate the equilibrium. Then pick a day at random, and whatever transpired on that day is basically going to be the result of today, which means if you bought on that day, you better buy it today and pay the price that went on that day, right? Now, clearly, if you got a revenue more than n over 4 in the equilibrium you gave me strictly, then if I pick a day uniformly at random, you're going to get a revenue strictly more than a quarter, which is not possible, okay? That is known. So that's it. But the surprising fact is not just that you cannot get more than Myerson optimal revenue, you get far, far lesser than this. Okay, for most distributions, the revenue doesn't even grow with n. Okay, it doesn't even grow with the number of days of interaction in equilibrium. We'll see what the equilibrium is, but this is known. This is not our result. Okay. So to get a sense of what's going on in this, let's begin with 2 rounds and play and see what happens. So again, the seller cannot commit to future prices. So on the first day, let's say he puts a price of P1, okay? And on the second day, so this is my notation, the subscript is the day, and 0 means that the buyer rejected on the first day, and 1 means he accepted, right? So the game tree. Now, what should the buyer do, right? Let's think of a simple-minded buyer for now, right? The buyer will reject if his value is smaller than some threshold t, and will accept if the value is larger than some threshold. So if he rejects, right, then the seller, if he follows this strategy,
V is his value, right?
V is the buyer's value.
And what is T?
T is some threshold.
So it doesn't depend on the price whether he rejects or not.
No, it will depend on the price. T is a function of all the prices. T is a function of the price on the first day, and so there's a whole strategy here, okay, right? So this buyer has all the tree in his mind. The seller's strategy is basically the price in the first round and what he'll do upon rejection, acceptance, etc. The buyer's strategy is to say what I'll do in the first round and all those things. We are analyzing it piece by piece, right? Do you have a question?
Well, his decision on day one, I don't see how it can depend on the prices on day two, because he doesn't know that.
No, but I mean the point of an equilibrium is that after having played this game for a long time, basically the buyer has the tree, he can see the tree basically.
But,
It's not written somewhere, but he can see the.
I don't understand the
No,
playing for a long time
iterative.
versus 2
So-
days.
Okay, so playing for a long time is confusing. So you're in searching for an equilibrium, you can think that the buyer knows the seller's randomized strategy and responds to that. So the seller, so in other words, if the buyer, if given the seller's strategy, the buyer could do something better, then you're not in equilibrium.
And what does equilibrium mean for a 2-day thing?
So equilibrium is, it doesn't matter if it's two or the whole game.
What's the whole game?
The whole two-day.
So I'm going to define. So I'm going to come to that actually. I'm going to formally define what the equilibrium is, etc. But for now, basically, let's say just assume that the buyer can see the entire strategy of the seller, right? So he can see this price. Of course, he can see this price before reacting, and let's say that he can also see these things, which I'll say what the game is later. But let's say he can see those things, right? Then he'll come up with some threshold t, and then if the value is smaller, he'll reject, and if the value is larger, he'll accept. In which
On day 1 and day 2?
was that? No. On day 2, he basically has to accept or reject just based on the value and the price, right? If his value is greater than the price, he accepts, otherwise he rejects, right? This is for day 1.
Okay.
Now, if this were an equilibrium, right, for instance, one of the conditions that has to be true is that if the buyer follows the strategy of rejecting when his value is smaller than t, then the seller should update his belief about the distribution to be uniform 0 t, and which means the price on this day should be t over 2. Right? You can deduce this. Right? And similarly, if he accepts v greater than t, you better update the distribution to uniform t1. And it's not difficult to calculate what the optimal price is. Again, it's max of half and t. You can calculate. Right? So these are all necessary conditions for equilibrium. Not sufficient, but these are necessary. Now, if this is true, what can we say from this alone? Well, one thing that is true is the buyer whose value is exactly equal to the threshold should be indifferent between rejecting and accepting. Now, if he rejects, right, he gets to buy just on day 2 at a price of t over 2, right? So that is this utility, t minus t over 2. His value is t, price is t over 2. If he accepts, he gets to buy on both these days, right? And his utility is t minus p1 on the first day. On the second day, he doesn't get any utility because the price is, at least the threshold t, right? The seller knows this information. So this left-hand side utility after rejecting should be equal to the right-hand side utility. So this will give p1 as t over 2. I'm not saying this is the equilibrium. This is one we are guessing basically, right? We're just in the process of guessing. And you can write the expression for revenue purely as a function of t, optimize it. It will come out to be 0.6. In other words, I'm saying this is a guess that we have come up with for an equilibrium for 2 rounds. The price on the first day is 0.3, and the buyer rejects if his value is smaller than 0.6, okay? Not 0.3, but 0.6, and accepts if the value is greater than 0.6, okay? Then you have this, and you can calculate the revenue to be 9 over 20. If you remember, the Myerson optimal revenue was 2 times a quarter, which is a half, which is 10% smaller than Myerson optimal revenue of a half. Okay? I didn't say why it is an equilibrium yet, but it is something. But this still doesn't look too bad, right? This is still only 10% smaller, but things change dramatically from 3 rounds onwards. So before going to 3 rounds, I'll now formalize what a perfect Bayesian equilibrium is. Okay? So if there is no commitment, then how do you reason about the game? We say that the game's outcome will be governed by this perfect Bayesian equilibrium. So what is perfection? So perfectness means that the strategies of the seller and the buyer are in equilibrium, that is, are in mutual best response for every sub-game. Okay? So one round has transpired, something has happened in that round, then there is a new game, now you're in a new situation, the belief has changed. For this belief, the strategy should again be in equilibrium. Okay? That is perfection. And Bayesian means that the seller updates his beliefs consistently according to buyer strategies. Right? Now I give you 2 objects in hand, buyer strategy and seller strategy. Given the buyer strategy, your belief updates about the distribution should be consistent with the buyer strategy, and the seller strategy itself should be optimal given his beliefs. Okay? So in other words, in full glory, the seller strategy is as follows. It should specify the price to be posted on the first round. For 2 rounds I'm specifying this, price on the first round. Then for every possible price he could have posted on the first round, he should tell you what is the price he will post on the second round if the buyer rejects this price of X. What is the price on the second round if the buyer accepts this price of X. Okay. Now let's think about this. Clearly a strategy should specify the price on the first round, the second round after rejection and acceptance. Why is it that we should specify why is it we should specify the price in the second round for every possible price on the first round, right? So for doing this, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the verifier, right? I gave you a pair of objects called strategies, and your goal is to verify that these are mutual best responses. What all information do you need to do this? So if I tell you that the price on the first round is P1, you have to see why can't he put a price different from P1, some X, right? So to see this, you have to know how the buyer will react for a price of X for every X, right? So then the buyer strategy should tell you for every possible price X and every possible history what he'll do, right? Now if this is the strategy the buyer gave, you better verify that the buyer is best responding by the strategy, which means if the buyer is saying at a price of X I'll react like this, you should ask him why did you react like this, because then he'll tell you I reacted like this because if a seller puts a price of X in the first round, then this is the price on the second round after acceptance and rejection, then that better be a part of the seller strategy. Okay, so that's why in full glory this is the strategy. From this, in a backward induction manner, you can verify that this is a perfect Bayesian equilibrium. From the last round I will verify that the buyer strategies are a best response for the seller strategies, sellers' beliefs are consistently updated given buyer strategies, and seller strategies are optimal given buyer's beliefs. Okay, there is a circularity here. Okay. Beliefs are consistent given strategies, and strategies are optimal given beliefs. So you can't compute a perfect Bayesian equilibrium, you can only verify it. Okay? You can only verify it. If I give you something, you can go and verify.
You can verify.
Yes, you can verify, yeah. Okay. So this is what.
So if they could commit, then both the buyer and the seller would be off. Is that correct? Would be better off. But
if they commit, yes.
But they can't.
Yeah.
Not a best response.
Right. Exactly. So if basically the buyer is not willing to believe that the seller will not succumb to temptation, that's it.
So is it clear like about existence or something, or do you have to go to random?
Right, I'm going to talk about existence. So there is a big hammer theorem which says that for every game there always exists a PBE. But the question is the nicety of the PBE, right? I mean, the perfect Bayesian equilibrium could be horrible, but how nice it is, that's basically the starting point of this work. Okay. Okay, so this is what a perfect Bayesian.
In the case of 2 is hard to roll.
Right, I'm going to yeah, that's exactly. So this is what previous work says. Right, so they analyzed finite horizon n rounds. They considered just 2-point distributions, right? Buyer's value is low or high. For this, they said that for all except the last few rounds, right? By few, I mean a constant number of rounds, independent of n. The price in the first initial n minus constant rounds is the lowest point of the distribution. Here it's L. Okay. Now Schmidt basically generalizes to arbitrary discrete distributions. Right, let L be the lowest point in the support of the distribution. And what he showed was that the PBE is guaranteed to exist according to some big hammer theorem, and in every PBE.
Are you saying in the Hart and Tyrrell's work that if the L and H are known,
right, they are known,
right, then the seller is going to price at a low price except at the end?
Yes.
Which means he won't even find out whether he could have sold at the high price until the end.
Yes.
I don't understand. That doesn't seem like the logical thing to do.
Yeah, but the thing is, this is basically what equilibrium dictates, right? If you want all the conditions that I specified in the previous slide to go through,
going to reject.
Yes.
I see. Okay. Right.
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 And basically, this is generalized not just for 2-point distributions, for arbitrary discrete distributions. Again, the seller will be posting the small price of L for all except the last constant rounds. This is, as he said, I mean, extremely bad deal for the seller, right? I mean, this is unnatural, and you don't expect this in practice also. Why, right? So here is one possible explanation for this. Okay, so we show the following. So we posit that a threshold equilibrium is what constitutes natural equilibrium. By a threshold equilibrium, I mean what we just saw for the 2 rounds case, right? The buyer rejects if his value is smaller than something and accepts his value is larger than something, right? A non-threshold equilibrium means that I'll accept for some set of values, and then I'll reject, and then I'll accept, and things like this, right? This seems unnatural for several reasons. First, from the buyer's point of view, and also from the seller, this would mean that his belief is basically supported on fragmented intervals, right? If the buyer rejects, then I'll say that probably his value is between 0 and 1/5 with some probability half, and 1/3 and 2/3 with some probability half. This kind of a belief will happen if it's not threshold. Right? So if we agree that threshold equilibria are natural equilibria and just look at them, then we characterize exactly when a threshold equilibrium exists. Okay? So we show that threshold equilibrium exists only for those distributions for which the 2-round game has an equilibrium where the first round has a price of L. By the way, the 2-round game always has a threshold equilibrium. It's not just for uniform 0. L is the low point of the distribution. Lowest point in the support of the distribution, arbitrary distributions, but the lowest point in the support of the distribution is L. Okay? If you have an equilibrium for the 2-round game where the first round price is L, only for such, precisely for such distributions is there a PBE in threshold strategies. Okay, otherwise a PBE doesn't exist basically. That's the problem in this game. No natural equilibria exist. And this kind of almost never happens, I believe. There are some distributions you can construct for which this is true, but for instance for the uniform 0,1 we just saw, and it's essentially the unique threshold equilibrium, unique equilibrium also. The first round price was 0.3, right? It's not 0. 0 is the low point of the distribution. Okay, so this is not quite satisfying. So you look at a natural equilibrium, this doesn't exist, there's no commitment game. We looked at what could happen if we allow partial commitment, right? So the seller says that I will not raise the price, right? That much guarantee I can give you, I will not exploit, but I could lower the price in the future, okay? So in some sense decreasing the price is beneficial both to the buyer and the seller, right? The seller is doing it because it's benefiting him, and the buyer in any case is happy to accept a lower price. So basically what we are saying is liquidation sales are allowed, right? One side is fine, other side you can't raise the price. If this were the case, this commitment can be given credibly, then we show that threshold equilibria are guaranteed to exist, unique threshold equilibrium for most distributions, and for the uniform 0,1 revenue we can analytically calculate what the revenue is. It goes from constant to square root n over 2 in the unique threshold equilibrium that exists for uniform 0,1. Okay. So you can compute this for any distribution. It's easy to write a program, but analytically it's not possible to do it for every distribution. So I took uniform 0,1 and you'll get this revenue as opposed to a constant.
But still much lower.
Still much lower than the Myerson optimum, correct.
And so why would the buyer be more willing to accept such a commitment than the other commitment, which you said you wouldn't accept?
It's not.
So I'm taking that as a rule of the game and then deriving what happens. So suppose this is a rule of the game.
So the problem is, the seller can give a coupon to the buyer. It guarantees that you can come. I'm selling, if you buy today at this price, here's a coupon that allows you to buy at this price every day for the next 10 days. But the commitment that I won't lower the price is less credible because it's a kind of promise which, it's a people who tend to say, well, now I have give you a special deal, and that's, you don't see people giving coupons promising in a legally binding way that they won't lower the price. People do announce best price of the year, and then next day it is even better price. And nobody ever sues them for lowering the price. But if they promise a certain threshold on the price, that's a commitment that can be more reasonably made.
So maybe I'm not sure exactly that's the question you asked. I think point I also, in case I keep the same price, of course, that's exactly what the Myerson thing is, right? Mm-hmm. In this case, you're telling me if I try to do something like that, the seller will hurt me. Oh, sorry, the buyer will hurt me. I will not be able to earn as much, or it will not be in equilibrium.
Right, you're not in equilibrium because you have learned that this guy is rejected. You have to lower the price, right? The distribution is to be updated. It's a uniform 0,1. Then you have to lower the price. You can't put the same price of a half. Half is optimal only for uniform 0,1, right? It's a 2-day game. So you can't put a price of a half again. You should lower the price. But on this branch, the acceptance branch, price will remain You're bound to put the same price by the rules of the game.
So, right, so because of if you retain the ability to lower, the seller retains the ability to lower the price, the buyer will want to inspire that.
Force him to that and lower
And
it.
so he will reject the first day even if the price is below his value.
Okay, so this means the price is monotonic, not that the first price is the maximum price.
I mean, in this branch, the price remains a constant. The acceptance branch, the price remains a constant.
That the first day is the maximum.
No, yeah. For instance, for a 2-day game, the first day price is larger than the first day price for an end day game, right? Is that what you mean? Yes, it goes the reverse. If I play a 2-day game, and then what the first price is, that price is larger than the price for a 1,000-day game, let's say. Is that what you're asking?
No, the day each price, this commitment cannot increase the price.
Yes.
That means each day is at most the previous day. It doesn't mean that each day is at most the first day. Right?
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, but the thing is, once you accept, basically the price won't change at all. Right? I mean, I can't raise the price, but I won't lower the price. There's no meaning in lowering the price, right? I know you were affording this price. Basically, it is fixed, the branch. Okay. So let's just go over this proof quickly. Let's say that Pn is the price in the first round of an end day game. Okay. And Tn is the buyer's threshold in the first round. That is, if I'll buy if value is at least Tn, I'll reject if its value is smaller than Tn. Un is the utility of the buyer with the highest value equals 1, what utility he gets, right? And Rn is the revenue in the end round scheme, okay? So let's draw this diagram. So you put a price of Pn on the first day, and if the buyer accepts to buy if value is at least Tn, then the distribution gets updated, but nothing really happens here, right? The price has to be Pn, right? You can't change the price, it will stay the same forever, okay? So if the buyer accepts in the first round, the point is that the price will remain fixed at the same Pn. And from this, you can write what utility of the buyer with value 1 is, right? The buyer with value 1, the highest value, he'll buy in all the rounds. And his utility is n times the utility in one round, which is 1 minus Pn, right? It's Un. Now if you reject, right, value less than Tn, then the distribution is uniform between 0 and Tn. So what do you think the price should be here? So uniform 0 Tn is basically just a scaled version of uniform 0 1, right? So and you are in an n minus 1 round game. So the price better be p times p sub n minus 1, but just scaled by Tn. Okay. So this is the price on the n round game, n minus 1 round game, and then this goes on. Now given this, you can say that we write the same equation as before. The buyer at the threshold is indifferent between buying and rejecting. If he buys, then the price is a constant, his value is n times Tn minus Pn. If he rejects, then his utility, now this buyer is basically at the end point of the support of the distribution, just like 1. So his utility is just u sub n minus 1, but scaled by Tn. This is the utility upon rejection, this is the utility upon accept. Then you can write the revenue, right? So you now have this 4 variable recursion, and you solve this, you get what Rn is, okay? And the price comes out to be, as you said, it's a very small price to begin with already, but the buyer's threshold is very close to 1, okay? So the price is extremely tiny, but the stingy buyer still is bargaining and saying no for some time before he accepts.
It's not exactly what you say. He's already scared you. It's not that he's going to, he still rejects a bit, but he's actually already scared the seller into putting a very low price. And to get the point across, he still goes and rejects it.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless his value is at the top.
Yeah.
You asked earlier why you don't see this in practice. This is because you don't have any losses for the seller for not selling. Oh, okay, you said it was normalized, but
It's normalized to some cost. I mean, you could take the basement to be something, right? Like.
okay, so 0. This really means just above his cost.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Right.
Okay, so that's the summary for 2 rounds. Basically, the point is that a threshold equilibrium is at least guaranteed to exist. We have revived back the natural equilibrium, and it's also kind of unique for most distributions. And you can compute it for any distribution, but analytically we do it for uniform 0 1. But as Mohit pointed out, this is still far from n. Square root of n is still much smaller. So we now go to an infinite horizon game where the game is repeated infinitely, but to keep utilities finite, we do a time discounting, which means both the seller and the buyer will discount tomorrow's utility by a factor 1 minus delta, right? I'll explain what Markovian strategies is in a bit, but for now don't worry about it. So time discounting is really equivalent to saying that the game could stop in any given round with probability delta, right? So for this, we calculate the PBE revenue for the uniform 0-1 distribution, and this is at least 69% of Myerson.
Don't you want it to be independent of what's going on?
Sorry, what is independent?
Something that could be dependent on the history.
Yes, this is independent.
Yes.
Right. So it's not just a stopping time. I think it's misleading to say stopping time.
Right.
Okay, so for the uniform 0-1 distribution, you get a 69% of Myerson optimal revenue. Okay, so what is Myerson optimal revenue? Again, you get a quarter in every round, but now it's quarter times this 1 plus 1 minus delta and so on. It is 1 over 4 delta. Okay, so you get a quarter of, you get 69% of 1 over 4 delta, right? That's the optimal benchmark, right? So this is basically the time when the seller is able to get back all this money in this model. So the main point is that the limit n approaches infinity in the finite horizon game is very different from the infinite horizon game. Okay.
The left was not discounted.
No, even in the discounted, I didn't say about that, but even if you discount the previous results, the two results I pointed to, previous Hart and Tirol and Schmidt, they show even with discounting, you get the same result, that for the first n minus constant rounds, you post a price of L, and then in the last few rounds something exciting happens, that's it. Okay, so you get a constant revenue. This is a consequence of fixed horizon and backwards induction, but random horizon is more natural. Okay, there's no backwards induction effect here. Okay, so now I'll motivate why we do these Markovian strategies and what Markovian strategies is. So basically, if the strategies were as it was for the finite horizon, basically dependent on the complete history, right? What all the previous prices were and how the buyer bought or rejected, you will really need infinite memory to even execute the strategy, right? The seller has to remember the entire history of prices and accept reject sequences, okay, what went on in the game. So that's not possible. So you can't even check if a given pair of strategies is in equilibrium. So if I give you something, you can't even verify that these guys are mutually best responding in finite time. Okay, if you allow strategies to be arbitrarily dependent on history. Okay, so Markovian strategies are basically those which depend only on the belief, not on history. Belief means what your belief is about the Bayes distribution today. It doesn't matter what path you took to come to this belief about the Bayes value distribution, right? Now this belief, of course, is not a.
What is the belief dependent on?
Belief is dependent on how the game progressed so far, right? So the buyer, I put a price of P, he rejected, okay, then this. I mean, there is an initial distribution, it's a uniform 0-1, and then I put a price, you rejected, then you accepted, then you rejected, and so on. I continuously update my beliefs.
Isn't that what you mean by history?
Each time you just use the interval and one move to update the interval.
Oh. Okay, so it is dependent on history, but in a more limited way.
Yes.
Right.
So there are several histories probably which could take you to the same belief, and you shouldn't say that for this history I'll do something, that history I'll do something else, right? So the belief is given, then you should say that basically that's all I need for the game, and you should, right? Yeah. So basically every subgame is identical to the original game except for the belief, and belief is defined just by these two numbers, right? The beginning and the end point of the interval. The point is, again, this motivates why a threshold strategy is.
Is it uniform?
No, I mean uniform is for the uniform distribution, it could be anything, but it's some interval, right? Yeah. But this again motivates why threshold strategies are natural, because if the strategies were not threshold, even the belief is not finite, belief will also grow, right? Because the belief will be a splintered collection of intervals and fragmented intervals, and it keeps on growing, right? But for a threshold strategy, it's clear that you always in an interval, irrespective of what the sequence was of accept and rejects, right? Okay. So if you restrict the seller to Markovian strategies, again the same notation, let's say P is the price in the first round, and T is the buyer's threshold, right? If value is higher than T, you'll buy, otherwise you'll reject. U is utility of the buyer with the highest value, namely 1, and R is the revenue, right? You draw this diagram, and here again, if the value is less than T, you update the distribution to uniform 0 T. Then we know that the price should be the same as before, but scaled by T, PT. But what do you do here, right? Value is larger than T, then distribution is uniform T1. It's different from uniform 0, 1. And earlier we got out of this issue by saying that the price cannot be raised, therefore I'll just take this price and put this price here. But now I can't do this because I'm not putting any such constraints. It's a 0 commitment now. So how do you find out what happens to the uniform T1 distribution? We don't know, but there is only one case for which we know. If it happens that this threshold is at least a half, okay, then for a uniform T1 distribution T greater than half, the optimal is just to put a price of T in all rounds. You can calculate this. Okay, so I won't get into that, but that you can do, okay, if it's at least a half for the uniform 0, 1 distribution. So our is again going to be a guess and verify strategy. Let's assume that T is greater than a half and proceed. If the buyer accepts in the first round, right, then the price remains fixed at T because T is greater than a half. So he gets a utility of 1 minus P in the first round, and then he gets a 1 minus T in every subsequent round, discounted with the factor 1 minus delta. So that is that. And the buyer with value T is indifferent between buying and rejecting. If he buys, he gets T minus P. In the future, he gets 0. If he rejects, then he gets a utility of the highest buyer, the highest value U, but scaled with T, and then there's a 1 minus delta scaling factor. Then the revenue expression can be written. So you solve this guy. So as delta goes to 0, you take the asymptotics, you get exactly, so this is 0.69, 69% of Myerson optimal revenue benchmark. As T delta goes to 0, and T is approximately this, which also verifies what we assumed, that T should be at least a half. Right. So that's basically the summary for this infinite horizon game. The main point is that the finite horizon game is n approaches infinity is very different from the infinite horizon game.
Again, mainly because of the assumption of what this Markovian assumption that you made?
Yeah, without Markovian, basically, I don't know what an equilibrium means, because I don't know how to verify. Yeah. So it's not just a question of analytical tractability or something. I don't know what an equilibrium means. I don't know how to verify it. So finally, so in the infinite horizon game, we saw that even without any commitments, one-sided commitments, you could get a constant fraction, right, 69%. Suppose I allow one-sided commitment now, which means that I promise not to raise prices. So do you think you can get even more than 69%?
You weren't raising prices in the previous one as well, huh?
Was that?
You were not raising prices even in the previous one.
I was not raising prices, but the price was, no, I was raising prices in the first round, but here it turns out that you get exactly the same revenue as Myerson. So I was raising prices. If you look at this, the price was not P, the price was T. The T remains fixed afterwards, but after the first round, the price did raise, okay? But it turns out that you get exactly the same revenue, even if you allow one-sided commitment for the infinite horizon time discounted. So that's basically the summary. So the finite horizon repeated sales game is not as nice as it was thought earlier. Threshold equilibria don't exist for most distributions, and one-sided commitment is better. You get something. The revenue at least grows with n. I think it seems like the infinite horizon with time discounting is the right model because it gives something that you would expect in reality. So this, as I said, is a very basic setting of repeated interaction, and you could do more than this. So what happens if there are multiple buyers, multiple sellers? Seller has a cost which is not publicly known. Again, that also is drawn from a distribution, let's say, and all those things. So how does the game proceed? What is an equilibrium in all these games, etc. So what about the motivation? I didn't talk about this. So if, in fact, people actually do this. So in search ads, you set a reserve price for what the minimum bid has to be for an ad to be shown, and this depends on how you bid in the past, right? Things like this. And there is behavior-based price discrimination.
How the buyers seller who sets the reserve price, it depends on how the buyer did in the past.
Yes.
Because you said, how are you? It's not
Okay.
you.
Yeah. And there is behavior-based price discrimination, which firms already do. Amazon is known to do this kind of behavior-based price discrimination depending on your history, right? So you have loyalty cards and everything, which basically once you swipe it, I see your entire history, what happened on this day and that day and so on. So I could do this. And this is how economists studied this. So in Hart and other papers, they call it behavior-based price discrimination. So that's basically all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, so of course, at the end you mentioned that reality there are many sellers and many buyers, and that's perhaps a more important reason for why we don't see the behavior. The question you raised at the beginning. Now, in terms of the commitment, one-sided commitment, you're saying that the commitment was monotone, not that the price be never raised in the first day. So what Yuval mentioned is you could get a coupon for the price the first day, and you could buy it at that price forever after. Then you might get upset if the price were lowered. If you got a commitment that the price didn't change and the price were lowered, that you might get upset. But that just means the price being lower than the first day. I don't see how that's related to monotonicity.
No, but the point is it never happens in equilibrium, right? There's a possibility in the game, but in equilibrium, once you accept, there's no question of lowering the price, right? Because it's, the seller is not best responding. If I know that you can afford this price, and I'm bound not to increase the price, I better post the same price in all rounds, right? So raising the price is not allowed by the game. Lowering the price is not good for me.
But you lower the price upon rejection.
Upon rejection, yes.
But if you buy, it doesn't make any sense for me to lower in the near future, right? Because I know you'll keep buying.
Right.
You bought now, you'll buy in the future as well.
Like your incentive not to reject is highest in the earlier rounds, because then you have more to benefit from the seller lowering the price. So, but once you decide, okay,
So you won't buy and then come to a remorse that, oh, later this guy has lowered, right? You keep on rejecting, and then, so basically the game proceeds like this. It comes, reject, 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 and accept, accept, accept. That's what happens in the numbers I showed you, right? Tn was...
But doesn't it depend on what the rules of the game are?
yes, yeah. I mean,
I'm questioning the rules of the game.
so the rules are that you're not allowed. Okay,
So there was
The
a
rules-
question
the
of
rules are more
justifying one
general.
commitment versus justifying
the rules
another
are
commitment.
that the seller always has the option to, I mean, he can, right, more generally, he can just give a coupon that says, that gives an upper bound on the price in a certain day. He can give any kind of coupon like that. He can tell you, in giving you a coupon that says in 7 days you can come to my shop and buy and get an item at, it's an option to buy at this price. And he can give any such number of coupons for any future days. So that,
so what is exactly the
and so
complaint about the...
There was an objection to commitment not to change the price, right?
Right.
But you said there wasn't an objection to commitment that the price be monotone, decreasing.
I mean, it's in between not doing anything at all and giving full commitment. Right? It's something in between. And of the two sides, I mean, you could do either decide that I won't lower the price or I won't raise the price. Seems like it's more...
it's different kind of commitments that are, so it's easier to make a commitment not to increase price, because I can just give you a card promising, not to increase the price. So that's, but it's harder and done less in practice to give a binding commitment not to decrease price.
Why?
Because you need more like outside monitor for that, while the buyer is himself a monitor because he's in. So if you later decrease the price, then the generally that's the buyer is less likely to protest. That if you then.
But that's ignoring the rules of the game. If the rules of the game were, I decided
asking-
what
No, so let me-
was based on
What
the fact
rule-
that you made this commitment and then you violated the commitment, then he would protest. If you're saying buyers don't protest in the real world, that's because they don't have any such rules.
No, when I said the commitment is not.
Are less likely to be.
No, so for the original game, when I said the seller
You
is.
get a rebate, you get it free or something. If I lower the price, you get it free.
Yeah, no, but
No, when the seller said I'm not able to commit.
just between the two parties, huh? You come to me, if you don't buy, I give you a coupon, you can always get this price later on in the future, don't worry.
Yeah, but that's the maximum price, not monotone.
No, every day you come, I'll give you this coupon for the current day's price. If you buy it, of course, then I'll know I'll keep the same price. If you don't buy it, you get this coupon. So of course, then the price will never increase, right? It doesn't make any sense for me to increase because, right? So in some sense, that's
No, when I said there is an objection to commitment, it's not about objection. So the objection is that the buyer won't believe. That's the credibility is the problem, not about whether he'll get upset or not. The buyer will not believe if I say anything. That's the reason why we studied the no commitment setting, right?
Well, if it's credibility, then what about these coupons that you've also mentioned?
The coupons are, this is a legal commitment, right? So if I tell you that you can buy this at this price tomorrow, then I have to honor it, and the equilibrium also turns out that time.
So you see a lot of people giving out coupons which legally bind them to an upper bound on the price, and then you see sometimes people saying this is the lowest price of the season, but you don't see people making legally binding commitments to that effect.
Well, this is an issue, a market where there are many sellers and buyers, and it's a real world. It's all completely different. Let's see how it applies.
A firm interact.
maybe on the same point, or slightly different. No, can you repeat the one about ad auctions? What was how the reserve price was so what?
Right. So if you are a search engine and you are a search engine and you have to set some reserves on the minimum bid to be able to qualify for getting shown in the sponsor search slots, then I can update this reserves based on how this let's say chocolate is the keyword for which you're bidding. Your Hershey's, let's say, then based on how chocolate has performed in the past, right? That of course includes not just you; it includes other Nestle and what other people did also. But people do this, right? Take into account how bidding has gone in the past and change the reserve price. And it's not clear how buyers will react, knowing that this is what is going to happen to the reserve price.
So usually people think of an isolated Vickrey auction, and then you should be truthful. But the point is that when in a repeated setting, even if it's Vickrey, even if it's second price auction, you have a motivation not to be truthful and to reject prices that are below your value in order not to divulge information that will be used in reserve prices in the future.
There's also no equilibrium in the real world.
That's arguable.
There are some situations where,
How could you argue disequilibrium in the real world?
I mean,
Well, you need some model to reason about, right? Otherwise, so how will you reason about what happens
Yeah,
then?
model. I'm talking about the real world. I made a statement about the real world, not about models.
So somebody is stupid at the time, right? Whatever. People are just circling. Is that what you're saying? It's just because if it's not equilibrium, somebody has a.
People aren't even optimizing.
so in search,
They do. So, for instance,
Everybody
has
just
an
buyers are optimizing?
no. Let me tell you. So, this is one of the most famous things. Why people change from generalized first price to
That's what actually not Gazelle, but there are many companies who just exactly do this. So GM won't go to Google and bid ads on it. GM will actually hire another company who will bid ads for them on Google, and that company is just
specializing in
to
optimizing.
So earlier, so the current rule is
Things that it's not equilibrium. Okay, that's what I should do, and I will not bid in the morning or whatever. By afternoon, I know prices will go down. That's when I will bid. Things like that. That's what they.
So big companies have enough resources to do that.
Yeah, but okay, that's where.
So for about 1 month, this happened in the early 2000s when the norm was to do a generalized first price auction, not a second price auction as it is currently run, right? Where if I get shown, I pay what I bid, right?
Who did that?
This was Yahoo and Oversure at the beginning. Google came and changed basically everything. So at that point, for 1 month, they documented this. There were 2 bidders who were basically competing in the sawtooth behavior, right? I bid something and you bid slightly epsilon more than that, you bid more than that, you bid more than that, you reach some level, then it dropped down to 0. I said, I don't care. Then once I don't care, you realize that there is no point in bidding so high, then you bid so low. For 1 month, they saw the sawtooth behavior. So bots were bidding basically.
What was yours? What did you say at the end?
Bots were bidding.
Robots.
Robots were bidding.
Robots were bidding. Yeah.
Yeah. So the point is, if you don't take incentives into account, these kinds of things can happen. They did happen. I'm just giving an example.
What about discretizing effects?
Okay, so I mean the existence or everything is for every distribution, not about discrete or continuous. So for instance, this one-sided commitment game, it holds for every distribution. I just calculated analytically for this. But for the infinite horizon, we just do it for uniform 0, 1. Right? It's not yet there for other distributions that I agree. I don't know.
Even uniform discrete.
Even uniform discrete, we haven't done it.
Okay, let's thank Devanur again.